Folks, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another fabulous edition of the Daily Power Parsha. Now, this is a very unique edition because it's our first session on a brand new book of the Torah, the fourth book, 4 out of 5, which is the book of Numbers. But who's counting anyway? I'm kidding, we're all counting, especially when it comes to this week's Torah portion and really this book. So I need to explain a little bit before we jump inside in the text. I want to give you a little bit of a kind of an outline on what's going on in this book. The book in Hebrew is called not Numbers, it's called Bamidbar, which means in the desert. It's a desert, it's a setting. Hey Max, good to see you. So it's giving us the location, right? It's like real estate, location, location, location. It's giving us the location of the stories that are happening in this book of Torah. It says that God spoke to Moses, Bamidbar, Sinai, in the Sinai desert, etc. So it's giving us the context of when these stories happen. The entire book of Numbers takes place in the desert during the 40 years of travel, of wandering of the Jewish people. And by the way, you should know, spoiler alert, sorry for spilling the beans early, the Jews weren't supposed to be in the desert for 40 years. As we read about in this book, this fourth book of Torah, there was a specific incident, the incident of the spies, which we'll get to in a subsequent Torah portion, that led to the stalling and the kind of the wandering for 40 years. But it wasn't always meant to be the case. At least, at first glance, it wasn't meant to be the case. Okay, so again, why am I saying this? I'm saying this because, when you talk about the English names of the books of the Torah, a lot of them match up, right? So you have Bereshis, which means in the beginning, and in English it's called Genesis. Okay, origins, beginnings, kind of makes sense. The second book of the Torah is Exodus, Shmot, not really. Shmot in Hebrew means names, Exodus means Exodus. So there's a bit of a discrepancy. Leviticus and Vayikra, maybe. I don't know. Leviticus means like the laws of the Levites, temple laws. Okay, that makes sense in English. In Hebrew, Vayikra means and God called. That's the opening verse. God called to Moses and gave Moses all these commandments. Okay. The fourth book of Numbers, in English it's called Numbers. There's a lot of counting in this book, a lot of censuses, or sensi, I'm not sure. It's sensational. Anybody get their census notice in the mail? Yes? Did you guys get your like the census, the U.S. 2020 census, yeah? I filled it out. I got a bunch of different letters. I forgot to do it right away. So I felt bad. They kept on sending me, I got like a few of them. I'm like, oh, wait, save the paper and the postage. I got this. Okay, anyway, so Baruch Hashem, we're counted, all is good. So it's called Numbers because there's a lot of census. Multiple times the Jewish people are counted and counted in different ways. But in Hebrew, it's called Bamidbar, which means in the desert, which is a different theme. It's not Numbers, it's desert. So what's the message? I want to actually speak about both themes. Even the English theme has a Jewish origin because in some ancient Jewish texts, this book is also known by the nickname as Chumash HaPikudim, which is the book of counting, the book of Numbers. So there's also a Jewish origin to the notion of this book being called Numbers. But let's speak to both. All right, what does it mean, the desert? What's the meaning of the desert? So in contrast to a city that is an inhabited city, a desert is a no man's land. And when I say no man's land, yeah, people live in a desert, but it's not a natural, normal place for people to live. Just think about Las Vegas. I'm kidding, right? So the point is like this. People don't typically, at least back in the day, before air conditioning, but you wouldn't live in a desert. It's a place where it's slithering across the hot, baked desert. I don't know. I've never really crossed the desert before, as you may or may not have noticed in the last minute or so of my conversation. The point is like this. The point is that a midbar, a desert, is not a place where people typically lived, as opposed to a city where people live. So the mystics say that the mystical meaning of desert versus city, that the city is where people are, including Adam Ha'elyon, supernal man, referring to God. Not that God is a man, but we're created in divine image, so there is a place where there is room to say, to euphemistically refer to God as Adam Ha'elyon, supernal man. Not man, but supernal man, i.e. God. So a city is a place where God is found. Again, metaphorically. The desert is a metaphor for those spaces where it's hard to find God. It's pretty much the rules of the desert, and it's kind of a no man's land, and it's a little bit abandoned, and it's dangerous, spiritually dangerous, and it's not easy to find God in those spaces. For 40 years, the Jews wandered the desert. And what's the message, the opening message of this book being called In the Desert? The message is that our mission in life, just like it was the mission of that generation 3,300 years ago, you and I also have a mission to go into those places that are the darkest and the most devoid of holiness, and to introduce godliness, spirituality there. To connect heaven, not just with earth, but even with the desert spaces of earth. That becomes our calling. You know, it's easy to be spiritual in a synagogue. It's not, relatively easy. You walk in, there's a context, yeah. But it's harder to do something spiritual at your desk, at your office at work. To have a Jewish book there, to have a tzedakah box there where you put a coin in every day, to take a few minutes at lunchtime and study some Torah. And I know we're working at home now, whatever, but there are places in this world, in our lives, that are a little bit less conducive to spirituality. And our job is not to separate and to say, here God is, and there, that's a different space. That's not where God is. That's where work is, or that's where leisure is, or that's where vacation is. That's not. Let's keep God in the synagogue. No, the point is, you have 2 or 3 million Jews, right, dancing the hora, right, carrying carrying the ark with the Torah, with the Ten Commandments inside, and traversing the desert for 40 years. And what were they doing by that? They were introducing holiness into a barren environment. So that is our job. We are meant, things haven't changed in 3,300 years. We are meant to introduce holiness and goodness and kindness into those desert spaces. So that's a message from the Hebrew name of the book. What about the English name, which is the book of Numbers, counting? Numbers because of counting, census. What's fascinating, you know what, maybe I'm going to screen share right now before I tell you this idea so that you can see it for yourself. Let's do it. I'm going to screen share. All right, take a look. Take a look-see. I'm going to pull this up right here, Bamidbar Torah reading. Okay, take a look at the opening of Numbers. Numbers chapter 1, verse 1. Okay, the Lord spoke to Moses in the Sinai desert, in the tent of meeting, that means in the tabernacle, on the first day of the second month, in the second year after the Exodus, from the land of Egypt, saying. I remember when I was a kid and we learned how to write, so it was always like, give your setting in the opening of your writing. Like, tell people, who, what, where. Like, give context. This does a really good job. This must have been listening, and the Torah must have been listening to English class or to composition class, because it does a really good job of giving us the setting. Where does it take place? So first of all, who's involved? God and Moses. God speaking to Moses. Where is it taking place? Sinai desert. When? First day of the second month in the second year after the exodus from the land of Egypt. So it's basically the year 2449 in the Jewish count of years from creation, 2449. second month, the month of Iyar, first day of the month. Rosh Chodesh. So what does God say to Moses? Take the sum of all the congregation of the children of Israel. In other words, count the Jewish people. So I'll ask you the question. That's all we need to know. I'm going to stop. We're going to get back to the share in a second, but I want to ask you the question. Who did the count? Who did the counting? The Torah tells Moses to do it. So who do you think did it? Who do you think? You can unmute yourself, by the way, at any point in time, especially when I ask it. Who do you think did the count?
Moses.
Moses? Yeah. I'll ask you a question. 2020, who's doing the counting? Who's doing the counting?
The government.
Yeah, but who's actually doing it?
Oh, individual help. Citizen, volunteer citizen.
Volunteers. It's volunteers. Yeah, you get people to volunteer, people go around, they make the phone calls, they go to door, they say, and I get it. You know, you have more than 2-3 million people. There's a lot of people in the United States of America. It's a bigger count. I get it. But there's something about this that seems a little bit absurd. In the original count, Moses himself was going tent to tent counting with a clipboard. Okay, I don't know if he had a clipboard or not. But he's going tent to tent. It's unheard of that the head of the spiritual leader or the head of the government, him or herself, would go around to take the count. And here Moses did it. And God commanded him to do it. So there's another very important clue here. I'm going to go back to the screen share. There's another very important clue about what was going on, why Moses was involved. Take a look at the Hebrew. It's not going to work in English. Take a look at the Hebrew of the second verse. It says, Se'u es Rosh. Se'u es Rosh, which means, literally, it means, Se'u es Rosh means lift the Rosh. What is the Rosh?
Head.
The head. Lift the head of the entire congregation of the children of Israel. Lift the head. The translation is, take the sum. Okay, that's not what it says. Literally it says, lift the head. It's translated as, take the sum or count. Right? Take the census of. But that's not what it says. Se'u es Rosh means lift the head. So this leads us to the following beautiful insight. And again, I'm going to stop the screen share so that I can see you all better. This leads us to a beautiful insight. What was the purpose of counting in the first place? Another question. Did God not know the number of Jews? God couldn't count himself. God's like, I got stuck at like 1,000,005. Can Moses, can you make this happen? Can you count? What's going on here? God is not stumped. God knows the number. We have a very simple calculus here. God's eye, and in between, they might feel worthless. They might feel meaningless. They might feel like their life doesn't really matter. Their birth was an accident. Their death is an inevitability. And in between, it doesn't really matter. A person can go through life and believe that they don't have objective, absolute value. They might not believe that they count. This census was not a simple counting of how many Jews there were in the desert, because God certainly knew that number. And if Moses needed to know the number, God could have told Moses how many Jews there were. It wasn't about getting the number. It was about sharing a message with every Yankel, Shmerel, Chanale, Rezele, Rachele. The message was for the Jew. And the message was, you count. And that's why Moses was the one that was sent around. Who better to convey this message that you individually, you and your family are important than Moses? Imagine if Moses sent a volunteer. That would not have conveyed the message. That would have conveyed a very utilitarian message. God wants to know the number, I'm here taking your number. But that wasn't the point. God doesn't need to know the number. God already knows the number. God doesn't need to count to get the number. God already knows the number. That it wasn't for God, it was for us. Moses goes around to every tent, to every Yiddish house, every Jewish home, and he says, in the desert, and he says, you count, and you count, and you count, and you count, and God told me, Su'u Esrosh, to lift you up, to lift your head, to lift your spirit. Not to lift your head in any, physical, but to lift your spirits. Because again, so often in life, you and I, people become demoralized. And people can feel like, what's it all about anyway? Do I really matter in the grand scheme of things? Do I have absolute value, or is it just something that I try to make myself feel better about? That, yeah, I kind of attribute some meaning and value to myself, but who says? Is it just a mind game that I'm playing on myself to get myself up in the morning? Does it really matter? And here God was giving that generation, and really us all, because we study it and we live with it this week, the gift of meaning. The gift of saying, no, you count, you matter. The Rebbe has a great line. Birth is God's way of telling you you matter. And that's a powerful idea. The fact that you were born means you matter. You have a purpose. You have meaning. There's a mission that you need to accomplish. That's a beautiful idea. Problem is, we don't always remember that idea. So from time to time, back in the day, God told Moses, count the Jewish people. Not because I need to know the number, because I need them to know that they count. So the counting here is less about number crunching and more about meaning giving, or sharing this message that, yeah, you matter. And that's why, again, it's called lifting the head, lifting the spirits. It's not about getting a number. The English is giving you the simple understanding of it, but there's a much deeper theme here. And that's why, again, Moses was tasked with this mission, because who better to share the value of the individual than a leader like Moses who loved the individual? I mentioned this a few weeks ago, famously, I think in this class, maybe in a different class, famously the reason why Moses got picked as Moses is because when he was a shepherd for his father-in-law in Midian, one of the little sheep ran away. He chased that sheep, found it by a river drinking some water, carried it back to the flock. On the way back is when God stopped him by the burning bush and said, Moses, I see how you care about everyone. That's a good leader. A leader is not someone who just looks at the collective, like, yeah, in general we're okay. No, the leader looks at the individual, and you're a good leader, so I'd like you to be on board. And that's, Moses was the perfect guy to convey the value of the individual. It's a very interesting, this touches on a very important conversation. The value of the individual versus the value of the collective. I'm going to speak about this more Wednesday night. I don't want to, get too entrenched in this conversation now, because that's the main topic for Wednesday night's class. But there's so many struggles between the individual and the collective. I mean, even today, think about how states are reopening. The question is, do we allow individual liberty at the potential expense of the collective well-being? How do we balance that? Somebody says, I want to go to work. I need to earn a living for my family. And then we say, no, you can't, because you got to think of the bigger picture, the collective. We all want to stay healthy, and you need to not do what you want to do in order that we should all be more protected. Well, how do you balance that? By the way, I'm not giving you an answer or even my opinion. I'm just telling you that there is a struggle between individualism and collectivism. And it's a struggle that is always around, and I think it's highlighted right now in the times that we're living in. This question, by the way, it's not a new question. There was a big, you may remember this, there were big pushback when the government first started to mandate motorcycle helmets. Anybody remember this? Motorcycle helmet law? Yeah. If you want to ride a motorcycle, you have to wear a helmet. Whoa! The federal government said you have to wear a helmet. The states and people push back. Who are you to tell me to wear a motorcycle helmet? How dare you? What is this? I don't remember if it was states that pushed back on the federal government or individuals that pushed back, that sued their states for putting that law. I forget which one. I think it was the government, though, because I think the government was saying that they're only going to give funding for highways if the states pass these laws, whatever it was. But again, another example of how do you balance the rights or the interests of the individual versus the rights or interests of the collective. What we see here, again, I'm not weighing into any of these questions. These are all very good questions and very big questions, and we'll have to save it. Give you another example. I'm not weighing into any of these. I'm just giving you more examples. Ransoming captives. Terrorists capture a journalist, God forbid, in Afghanistan or in Iraq. And they hold that journalist hostage. Yeah? And now they're demanding, $123 million ransom. The U.S. government has, unlike other governments, like in Europe, other countries, they do pay the ransoms. The United States famously, and some other countries famously, have a no ransom policy. They don't play. At least that's the stated. The question is, what if a family says, we have the money, we want to pay the ransom? It's a question. Do you know that our government has pressured families and told them not to pay? Because if they do pay, then they're in violation of aiding and abetting terrorist groups and financing terrorist groups. The government put pressure on Nick Foley. Remember Nick Foley? Photographer? Nick Foley was beheaded in one of those videos. He was captured, beheaded. His family raised money. These types of questions. iPhones. Should we unlock iPhones? Should Apple be forced by the government to unlock an individual's iPhone for the collective benefit of finding out about terrorism? All these questions. So one thing we find here, and Judaism really tries to balance both, but one thing we find here in the opening of this book is the value of the individual. God says to Moses, I don't only value the Jewish people as a collective, Am Yisrael, the nation of Israel, or even as B'nai Yisrael, the children of Israel. I value them as the individual. Go to each tent and go count and let them know you are counted. By the way, you should know, you may have noticed this in the translation before that I had up, the actual census was taken of men aged 20 to 60. So it wasn't every individual. The elderly, the children, the women were not counted. Well, what's going on with that? What kind of census is that? It was basically, essentially, two ways to look at it. Either heads of household, which, again, typically then meant a male 20 to 60 was the head of household, or men of military age. The military then, I think I mentioned this last week, was in biblical law was only available for men aged 20 to 60. So that's what the census was. It was a count of the military eligible individuals. But the theme of the census, the theme extended to every individual in the nation because everyone was represented by that household and everyone in a way counted within that count. So if you were the parent of or the child of or the spouse of, it was all part of that census. So again, the opening theme of this book is two things. Number one, we live very often in a desert, in a place that is devoid of higher purpose, higher meaning. Our job is not to run away. Don't escape the desert, but introduce holiness into the desert. And that's desert, Bamidbar. And numbers means you count. And the truth is the two are intertwined. How is it that you and I can walk into I don't want to over-dramatize it, but a spiritually foreign or spiritually hostile environment, a place in which it's not obviously holy or spiritual? How do we have the strength to walk into that space and not be influenced to kind of hide, our values, but to be inspired to share that with others, to not be influenced by the coldness, but to influence in a warm way. Where do we get the strength? Knowing that we count. So how can we successfully introduce light into the desert? It's Bamidbar. It's by numbers. It's by knowing that we count. And now I've connected the two ideas. When you know that you count, because you have a mission, and God sent you here for a specific purpose, then you're empowered to fulfill that purpose in those difficult spaces. You and I were not sent here to bring more holiness to a Torah scroll. The Torah scroll, thank God, is already very holy. You and I, or in a synagogue, we're not meant to introduce more holiness in a synagogue. We're meant to kind of get inspired in a synagogue, but then meant to take that outside the synagogue and introduce holiness in that space. Make sense? Hopefully all these ideas are coming together. I want to mention, let's go back to this. I'm going to share a screen and maybe we'll do one more insight for today. Let's see. Okay. So just so you see here, from 20 years old and upwards, all who are fit to go out to the army in Israel. So again, clearly the verse says it's about the military age over here, which the Torah says elsewhere it's 20 to 60, that's military age. Okay, it talks about the leaders from each tribe. Okay, let's skip that, or let's just go quickly through that, or past that. Okay, let's keep on going. Second reading. So that was Sunday. Let's talk about Monday. Today's reading. Okay, now we have, after that preamble of the first reading and the second reading associated with today, we have the actual census begins. We start with the tribe of Reuben, and you see here there were 46,500, then Simeon or Shimon, and then Gad, and then Judah, and then Issachar, and then Zebulun, and then Joseph, Ephraim, Menashe, Benjamin, Dan, Asher, Naphtali. Okay, fine, good. All the tribes are counted. And then the total, just so you know, the total, again, 20 and up, 20 to 60, fit to go to the army. So the total of that number, 603,550. 603,550. Now, this is why you'll hear many times that the Jews in the desert number 2 to 3 million people. Where do you get that number from? So you figure, if there's 603,550 men between 20 and 60, so then there would be another, you would imagine, same amount of women the same age. So that's another 603,000. So now we're talking about, over, 1.2 million. 1.2 million plus people. Not including anyone under 20, boys and girls, or anyone over 60, men and women. So that's where the number 2 million plus comes from. If you just want to triple this number, well, no, whatever. If you get if you triple it, you get 1.8, 1.9 million. So it's an easy stretch to get to 2 million plus, 2 to 3 million people traveling in the desert. Okay. However, here's what I want to point out before we close out for today. The Torah specifies that the Levites, you may have noticed this, the Levites were not counted amongst the Jewish people. Why not? Why not? God said so. Only the tribe of Levi you shall not number, and you shall not reckon their sum among the children of Israel. They do not get counted amongst everyone else. Why? Well, you probably know the answer why. Because they were not military. They were not going out to battle. This was only people who were counted were military eligible individuals. The Levites had a different role. The Levites were never counted. They were never included for the army because they were the teachers. They were the priests. They were the Levites. They were the spiritual leaders of the people, and they had a different task. As the verse says in verse 50, but you shall, in others rather, you shall appoint the Levites over the tabernacle of the testimony, over all its vessels, and over all that belongs to it. They shall carry the tabernacle, and they shall minister to it, and they shall encamp around the tabernacle. They have a different job. Their job is to serve in the Mishkan, in the tabernacle, the temple. They're to serve there and in the desert, that while they were traveling. the temple that they had was portable. So they would carry it. They would literally put it on their shoulders or load it up on wagons. They would carry the tabernacle. It was like, I don't know, I'm going to speak, I don't mean in a disrespectful way. It was like a Lego, but not exactly Lego, but kind of like a portable, assemble, disassemble, reassemble type gig here. And the Levites were in charge of this whole thing. They were, not the Levites, the Kohanim and the Levites, the tribe of Levi, they were in charge. What's the message here? The message is, I think, many messages you can take from this, but one message is that not everyone plays the same role in life. I think this is an important message to remember. Not everyone plays exactly the same role. You have the person who's in the army, and then you have the person who's ministering in the tabernacle. That they both have equal value. Now, they're not going to have the ministers, whatever. You have it says ministering, that's why I use the word ministers. You have the priests and the Levites who are engaged in that holy service, operating the tabernacle, the Mishkan. You have the other people who are doing their thing. When the Jews entered Israel, you had the farmers, you had the seafaring tribes that used to do commerce by the sea. You had the Levites and the priests who would do their thing, and everyone has their mission, has their purpose. No one purpose is better than the other, but it's important to know the distinction between purposes. This is again a theme that I'll talk about Wednesday night at the class. How it's really important to not want to live someone else's life. I once heard a line from Mark Twain that I love. I don't know if he wrote it, but this is what I heard in his name. Be yourself, everyone else is taken. And I love that line. I love that line because it so captures a Jewish theme, which is everyone is unique. Now, everyone is unique, so we're all the same, but in a unique way, if that makes sense, right? We're all unique, all of us, but unique. That's the magic sauce, right? It's that individuality and that collectivism that works kind of hand in hand. So, here's the point. It doesn't benefit us to look at someone else's life and say, well, why do they get to be this and why do they have that and how come I don't? That's never a productive conversation. Listen, if a person wants to become something or strive and grow and learn, more power to them. But just to look at someone else and say, why them and not me, that's not a productive thing. So what is productive? We're always meant to grow. So if a person sees someone and sees what they're doing and wants to do that, gesundher, hey, go ahead. But otherwise, what's really healthy is to accept who we are and embrace our unique gifts and talents and abilities and circumstances. No one else woke up exactly where you woke up today. I don't mean physically, I mean the whole deal, right? I mean everything. No one is you walking through this life. And so you are uniquely positioned to do something that no one else can or has ever or will ever do. Why would you trade that in for anyone else or for something else? You have your mission, right? So don't discount it. In fact, recognize that you count. Your mission counts. All right, that's it for today. Can't say that's it for today, but that's all I have right now for the Daily Power Parsha. Much more coming tomorrow. We have a lot to talk about tomorrow, including how the Jewish people, like actually physically, when they set up camp, how did they pitch their tents in the desert? How was it configured? Was it done in order? Was there a certain structure? Or was it just like, wherever you find space, put out? Listen, if Burning Man can create a grid system, God and the ancient Israelites could have also created that, and they did, and we'll talk about that tomorrow, and some other themes as well. So join me tomorrow for Daily Power Parsha. But until then, it's been wonderful. Any questions, comments, feel free